Hi everybody, thanks for coming. My name is Leonard Medman. I'm a first-year master's student at the University of Texas at Austin, and today I'll be presenting on the effect of a university's geographic political orientation and DEI on its virtual DEI. So just some background, right? With a lot of the bills, right, anti-DEI bills that have been passed, and also with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, there's been a lot of individuals not wanting to come to certain colleges or not even considering applying to certain universities because of their DEI policies or what their state's doing, and of course, right, whether they would allow or not allow abortions, right? So that creates inequity, of course, because if certain students can't even consider colleges because of the state that they're in, whereas other individuals who are maybe pro-life or more Republican can consider more options, that there's some inequality there, right? So just to point out, right, for liberal leaning students, right, the most common reasons for ruling out schools was because they were too Republican, too conservative on reproductive rights, and a lack of concern about racial equality, and too conservative LGBTQ laws. Those four were above 50% as to them ruling out a certain school because it was in a certain state. So a lot of students, liberal-leaning students, tend to rule out schools. Now, we see this a little bit with conservative students, but not as much. The number one reason for conservative students is it's too democratic, but even that's less than half. So we see liberal-leaning students tend to have a little bit more restrictions and because of the laws that are a little bit more liberal, anti-DEI, as once again we're seeing across the world. So my research, right, and what I was trying to look at, well, I was trying to see if the states, right, that the schools were in, or the state's diversity scores, inclusivity scores, or equity scores as measured by third parties, had any influence on whether they mentioned, right, their support for diversity, equity, or inclusion on their website. So for example, a school like UCLA, which is the number one most applied to school, right, they're in California, how does that score relate to whether a school in California like UCLA would have support for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and put that on there. So I examined the top 250 universities based on the number of applications received. I could have gone to US News, but I thought that it was better to just look at the number of applications because that's what we're looking at, right? How many applications do students choose to or choose not to submit to certain schools because of maybe their location. And I looked at the homepage, which is the page you go to, right? It's the first page, the admissions page, and the lower banner, right? Which is, if there's a website here on the lower banner, it'd have like just some links, right? Because those are the three I thought most visible places, right, that people look, and that's supported by some of the literature too. So the coding, I iteratively coded diversity, right, on websites. I just used Control F, and this was iterative, so sometimes I'd have to go back and see certain words that were used, and I would have to add new words. But for diversity, I coded through the terms diversity and difference, right? And then equity was coded for through equity and equality, and inclusion was coded for through the terms inclusivity and discrimination, right? And discrimination, of course, used in the context of we oppose any sort of discrimination, stuff like that. And coding was conducted from May 16th, 2023 through May 20th, 2023. Caveat number one, if a term clearly referred to something other than intended spirit, for example, if something was coded, it's like different backgrounds, we encourage that, of course, that's DEI. But if it's come here to make a difference in the world, right, that's not DEI, so I don't include that. Of course, if it was the opposite of the term, like if it was for discrimination, right, if it was like we support discrimination, luckily no schools have that, right, but obviously that wouldn't be coded under DEI. And lastly, they didn't have to be phrased the exact same way. So if something was coded under equity, right, or like diverse and diversity, right, that kind of works. It doesn't have to be diverse or diversity. So first question, how often do terms related to diversity, equity, and inclusivity appear on university web pages? I thought those descriptives in and of themselves would be interesting. So 82% had terms related to diversity, equity, and or inclusivity on one of those areas. 38.8% of them had them on university homepages. 34.8% had them on university admission pages, and 53.2% had them on website lower banners, right? That number, of course, goes over 100 because if somebody had something on the lower banner and on the homepage, I'd only code it once, right? So, but that means the majority of universities have some sort of support there, but that supports usually tends to be on the website lower banners, right? Not explicitly on the admissions page or the home page where you can see it. And diversity-related words, right? Specifically diversity, were around 61.8% is what we found across all of them. And terms like diverse and diversity specifically were found at 59.6%. And terms like difference and different were found at like 7.6%. This is across all three: homepage, admissions, right? Stuff like that. Equity and equity-related words, right, was 32%. The terms equitable, right, stuff like that was found at 23.3%, and equality found at 15.2%. So people tend to like the word equality or equity more than equality, which of course, right, equity, same ending place, equality, same starting place. And inclusivity was around 59.2%. Terms like inclusivity and inclusive were found at 39.2%. And terms like discrimination and discriminatory found at 37.6%. And of course, we oppose discrimination of any kind, stuff like that. So then I wanted to see if there was the relationship, right? So does political orientation, like of the location, and I measured this through, right, specifically how many votes, right, a certain state got for Republican versus how many votes they got for Democrat. And I decided to use a logistic regression, meaning the independent variable was an interval, because I didn't want to just label it Republican or Democrat, because some states voted really Democrat, some states voted really Republican, so I didn't want to lose that. And I scaled, the independent variable was Republican votes, Democrat votes, it wouldn't have mattered, but I just chose Republican votes, and I scaled them up to 100. So if it was like 48% chose Republican, 51% chose Democrat, it would have been scaled up, so both of them equaled 100. So, right. So the logistical regression was not significant, so there is no relationship based on the location, right, a university's in, right, how they voted, and whether that university in that state is likely to put DEI on their website. For Republicans, it was around 43.6%. If there was DEI anywhere, the Republican vote was around 43.6%, and if there was DEI nowhere on the webpage, Republican vote in that state was around 45.1%, but again, not significant. And then the relationship was there any relationship between the diversity, equity, inclusion of the university's location and the articulation of its stance towards diversity, equity, and inclusion on its website? So this was looking at like diversity scores, equity scores of that state, and this found that there was no relationship for either of them, whether it was diversity, equity, or inclusion, right? And if you want the more specific stats, I can get that to you later, but pretty much no significant relationships. The one that approached significance was diversity, but other than that, inclusivity, equitable, right, or equality, right, were not significant. So some considerations, or what we might call in the paper limitations, right? So what a university endorses does not resolve all the issues, right, of course, right? Things especially like abortion, right? Just because a university endorses or cares for abortion and wants to help students with abortion, if the state doesn't allow it, not much a university can do, right? What a university endorses may not be endorsed by professors or students, and the sample is also not random, 250 of the top universities. Some of the implications of the descriptives. So universities that do have DEI support on their homepage are in the majority, right? Or that do not have DEI support on their homepages are not in the majority, right? So universities that have DEI support on their admissions page are not in the majority, and universities that have DEI support on their lower banner are in the majority. So that's all to say. If you want to go to your school and be like, hey, we don't have diversity, equity, inclusion on our website, right? They might be like, we don't want to be too controversial, what have you. Putting it on the admissions or homepage, the majority of the universities might not have that, but you can at least get it on the lower banner because the majority of the universities have that, and the majority of the universities have it either on the home or admissions page. Some of the implications for the inferential, right? There was no relationship, but I see that as harmful, right? Because if students are not wanting to go to a certain university because of their state policies, then I believe, right, the universities in those states should try to overcompensate, right, and just show the students, right, I understand our state's doing this, but we support your diversity, equity, and inclusivity goals, right? And I think that, not saying that it's harmful, you can argue that we just want that everywhere, but given that it seems to be lacking in a lot of places, around 50% or 30%, I think we should just try to increase that number at least for those states that, or those universities in states that have lower DEI scores or tend to vote more Republican. And the big implication, right, is that students may continue to avoid universities, especially if they have a certain ideology, political ideology, which is harmful to maybe liberal-leaning students compared to conservative students. Thank you.